Now we're going to get started on the next three sections. Section 8.4, 8.5, and 8.6. The synapse. The synapse is a junction between the neuron and another cell. The way those two cells communicate is through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. And the communication happens in one direction only. Where a nerve and a muscle meet, it's called a neuromuscular junction. Where a nerve and a gland meet, it's called a neuroglandular junction. There's three parts in a synapse. We have a presynaptic neuron, then we have a synaptic cleft, and then we have a postsynaptic neuron, or a postsynaptic cell. This is an image of what we've just described, and you're able to see the presynaptic neuron, the synaptic cleft, and then the postsynaptic membrane of the other cell, neuron, muscle, or gland. Now, there are certain types of neurotransmitters. One type of neurotransmitter that's really important in the human body is acetylcholine. And those synapses are called cholinergic synapses. It happens in a four-step process. First, the action potential will arrive at the axonal terminal. Next, acetylcholine is released and diffuses across the synaptic cleft. Third, the acetylcholine binds to the receptors and triggers depolarization of the postsynaptic membrane. And the fourth and final step is when the acetylcholine is removed by ACHE, or acetylcholine esterase. This gives you the images that describe the action potential moving to the postsynaptic membrane. And this is the same thing, but now it's going in a table form, and you can read that also. Now, there are other important neurotransmitters. One is called norepinephrine. That's called an adrenergic synapse. The European way of saying norepinephrine would be noradrenaline. You would know it as adrenaline. Some other neurotransmitters are dopamine, GABA, and serotonin. They're central nervous system neurotransmitters. And then there's some misunderstood or less understood neurotransmitters. Two are gases, NO and CO. There are two types of responses, an excitatory response or an inhibitory response. Usually, acetylcholine and norepinephrine trigger depolarization, and it's an excitatory response or an excitatory synapse. Usually, dopamine, GABA, and serotonin trigger hyperpolarization, and it's an inhibitory response. Neuronal pools is a term that describes the complex grouping of neural pathways or circuits. Divergence is a pathway that spreads the information from neuron to multiple neurons. Convergence is the opposite. It's when several neurons synapse with a single postsynaptic neuron. This is an image or illustration of divergence in A and convergence in B. Let's go to the next section, 8.5. All neural tissue in the central nervous system is protected by three specialized layers of membranes, or three specialized membranes: dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. Dura mater is the very tough outer covering. Arachnoid mater is separated from the dura mater by the subdural space, and below the epithelial layer is the arachnoid space, and it's created by a web of collagen fibers, but it also contains the cerebral spinal fluid. That's very important. And the final innermost layer is called the pia mater, and it's highly vascularized. That means it has a lot of blood vessels, and it provides the needed oxygen and nutrients. Now, the final section is we're going to describe the structure of the spinal cord. The major neural pathway between the brain and the peripheral nervous system is the spinal cord. Make sure you know that. That's a test question. It can also act as an integrator for spinal reflexes. That involves the 31 pairs of spinal nerves. That's also a test question. Remember that in the middle of the spinal cord is a central canal. It's a narrow passage, and it contains the cerebral spinal fluid. Now, there are spinal segments. Each pair of dorsal root ganglia contains cell bodies of sensory neurons with axons in the dorsal root. Ventral roots contain the motor neurons and their axons also. Their roots are contained in one spinal nerve. This shows you the division of all the spinal nerves, and you can see the area, the cervical spinal nerves, the thoracic spinal nerves, the lumbar spinal nerves, the sacral spinal nerves, and the coccygeal spinal nerve. Now, in the dorsal root, we're talking about the sensory, and that's the dorsal root ganglia. Whereas the ventral root, we're talking about the motor, and you're able to see the white and gray matter here. And here you're able to see the spinal nerve that contains both sensory and motor neurons. Remember, the gray matter is made up of glial cells and nerve cell bodies. That's a test question. The white matter is the myelinated and unmyelinated axons. Also a test question. Make sure you know that in the spinal cord. Now, the white matter can be organized into 3 columns, and usually we call them tracts. The ascending tracts go to the brain. They bring the sensory information to the brain, while the descending tracts come from the brain to the peripheral nervous system, and usually that's the motor neurons. These next 3 are just images showing you the way the spinal nerves are set.